Welcome to our closing plenary today. I'd like to introduce our session on accessing the Federal Home Loan Bank's community investment programs. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists today. We have Annie Kraft. She currently serves as Senior Program Specialist for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago's Community Investment and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group. In her role, she helps member financial institutions and their community partners access capital to strengthen neighborhoods across Illinois and Wisconsin. Our other presenter today is Mr. Thomas Dapis. He has worked for the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco for over 15 years, 13 of those years in community investment and 2 years in their internal audit. He serves currently as the Managing Director of Homeownership and Economic Development Programs. I'd like to hand it over to Annie.
Thank you, Fern, and good afternoon to everyone virtually attending today's session. I want to start by thanking the entire OWISTA team for hosting this convening. I am a first-time attendee, and it is an incredible honor to be here today. In the plenary this afternoon, Tom and I will cover how native CDFIs can access Federal Home Loan Bank community investment programs to meet your affordable housing and economic development needs. There will be time at the end of the presentation reserved for questions, and please feel free to chat them in throughout, and OWISTA staff will work with Tom and I at the end to answer them. Additionally, you will find a resource list on the CVent website that has program details and contact information for each Federal Home Loan Bank in the system. Lastly, before I begin, we encourage you after today to connect with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago that represents your state and familiarize yourself with its member institutions. It is our hope that today marks a starting point of collaboration between native CDFIs and the Federal Home Loan Banks for years to come. Next slide, please. As Fern said, my name is Annie Kraft, and I represent the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, which services our district of Illinois and Wisconsin. I joined the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago in 2016, and I currently manage our capacity building grant program for CDFIs and a new small business grant program. I am joined today by Tom Dapis from the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. I'm going to pause for a moment and let Tom tell you a little bit more about himself.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you, Fern. Hi, everybody. I'm honored as well to be at this convening, and I want to thank you all for making the time for this presentation. My name is Tom Dapis, as mentioned, and I've been with the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco for over 15 years, which covers the states of Arizona, California, and Nevada. I manage the homeownership and economic development programs and look forward to explaining these programs in this presentation. Back to you, Annie.
Next slide, please. I want to start by providing some background on the Federal Home Loan Bank system, who we are and what we do. Congress chartered the Federal Home Loan Banks in the 1930s to bolster mortgage lending. While Congress created the Federal Home Loan Banks, we are not governmental entities. Instead, we are classified as government-sponsored enterprises, or GSEs. There are 11 Federal Home Loan Banks across the country, and each of us represents groups of states and territories we call districts. Our districts vary in size considerably. For example, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago and the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis have a 2-state district, whereas the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines district includes 16 states and territories. Additionally, each Federal Home Loan Bank is independently operated and regulated by the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Together, the Federal Home Loan Banks are significant contributors to affordable housing and economic development initiatives across the nation. Next slide, please. The Federal Home Loan Banks are structured as member cooperatives. Commercial banks, thrifts, credit unions, CDFIs, and insurance companies are all eligible for membership in their district's Federal Home Loan Bank. However, some membership requirements do differ by Federal Home Loan Bank. Our members range in size from some of the largest financial institutions in the country to community banks with just a single branch. The table on this slide highlights the number of members across the system by membership type. As you can see, the most common membership type is commercial banks, followed by credit unions. CDFI membership was first allowed in 2010 and has grown incrementally ever since to the 68 members we have today. Tom will discuss CDFI membership in greater detail later in this presentation. While there are many benefits of being a Federal Home Loan Bank member, I want to highlight a couple that pertain to today's conversation. First, the Federal Home Loan Banks are a reliable source of liquidity. Members can access financing to support their initiatives at a very low cost. Second, members can access community investment programs in partnership with and on behalf of community organizations like you. Next slide, please. Before we dive into the specifics of our community investment programs, I want to touch on another commonality among the Federal Home Loan Banks, and that is our advisory councils. Each Federal Home Loan Bank has an advisory council comprised of leaders working in affordable housing and community economic development. Each advisory council provides insight into the district community development needs and makes programmatic recommendations. Many of our advisory councils include individuals with experience and expertise working in Native American communities. Serving on the advisory council is another way Native CDFI leadership can connect to the Federal Home Loan Bank system. Typically, nominations are accepted annually, depending on the number of vacancies, so I encourage those interested to connect with their Federal Home Loan Bank. Next slide, please. At this point in the presentation, I am going to switch gears to focus on our community investment programs and how you can access them. I have spent the previous 5 slides explaining our membership model because nearly all community investment programs are accessed and administered through Federal Home Loan Bank member institutions. We broadly classify our programs into 2 categories: regulatory and voluntary. Regulatory programs are standard offerings provided by each Federal Home Loan Bank each year. These include the Affordable Housing Program General Fund, the Affordable Housing Program Set Aside, and our community lending programs. These programs are all governed by federal regulation and feature significant oversight from our regulator. Conversely, voluntary programs are unique offerings that differ by each Federal Home Loan Bank. A voluntary program offered from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas may not be offered by the Federal Home Loan Bank of Pittsburgh, and vice versa. Examples of voluntary programs include small business grant programs, disaster relief funding, and low interest loans. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Tom to explain the Affordable Housing Program, which is what the Federal Home Loan Banks are most known for. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Annie. So I'll cover the affordable housing program that the FHLBanks offer, which we call AHP for short. I'm going to focus on the basic program features. So note that each FHLBank administers the program a bit differently, and we'll be providing a resource list so you can check our websites for specific program details. Now, per federal regulation, each bank must contribute 10% of its net income to the program. In dollars, this ranged from about $7 million to $40 million in 2021, depending on the bank. The program has 2 parts. First, there's a general fund, which can be used for the construction and rehab of both rental and homeownership projects for low-income households, meaning below 80% of the HUD area median income, or the HUD Native American income limits for that area. Next slide, please. Now, also, before we get into the general fund, I want to mention that there'll be a second part for the affordable housing program, which is a homeownership fund that I will get into later. And that is for assistance to low-income home buyers. Getting back to the general fund, this is gap financing for housing projects. So much of the time, program funding is used for low-income housing tax credit projects, but it can also be used with non-tax credit financing, such as HUD financing or nonprofit fundraising. An example would be a housing project that has 10 million in tax credits and needs another $500,000 for development. So it gets this funding from the affordable housing program. Eligible grant recipients include housing developers that are nonprofits or tribal housing authorities. Now, per regulation, all program grant applications and funding go through those FHLBank members that Annie listed. For example, CDFIS, credit unions, and retail banks. The FHLBanks don't fund grants directly to the housing developer. We fund to the member, and then the member funds to the developer. Again, we'll provide a resource list later on so you can see who our members are if you're interested in the program. Next slide, please. So this slide covers the various program stages. To summarize, a housing developer will apply for a grant through an FHLBank member. That application competes with other housing projects during an annual application round that each bank holds. The FHLBank will then review the applications and make awards. Moving on, when the developer is ready to use the grant, it makes a disbursement request through the member to the FHLBank. And again, the bank disperses the grant to the member, which will then disperse to the developer. Lastly, there's a compliance period where the developer provides documentation to verify that the grant was used for the purposes as stated in the grant application. This period is 15 years for rental projects and 5 years for homeownership projects. Next slide, please. So moving on, the program has funded over 50 million to 116 housing projects in tribal communities. And I'll show you some examples. Next slide. So first we have an AHP General Fund example, the Hawkeye Sands Apartments. And the sponsor of this project is the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. The member in this case was the Lumbee Guarantee Bank. And the grant amount was $1 million, which was used to rehab 62 multifamily affordable housing units. Next slide, please. All right. So the second example from the AHP General Fund is this supportive housing sponsored by the Chippewa Housing Authority, and the member is the Bay Bank located in Wisconsin. The grant amount is slightly over $400,000. And you can see here, this is an example where there was an adaptive reuse where a motel was converted into over 20 affordable housing units. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that there's also a second affordable housing program, which is called the Set Aside Program, which is a homeownership assistance program. The federal home loan banks call this set aside because each bank sets aside funds each year for this program. Now, it's important to note that each federal home loan bank has a different name for its program. And so this program can be called different things in different parts of the country, but the programs serve a variety of home buyers, as you see here on this slide. So definitely, when you get that resource list, contact your local member bank to find out what your federal home loan bank calls their set-aside homeownership program. Next slide, please. So, like the AHP General Fund, that I covered earlier. The set-aside grants are funded through FHLBank members and can be used with other funding sources such as local government down payment grants. But unlike the AHP General Fund, the set-aside is a first-come, first-served grant program rather than a competitive application program. And the grant amount per home buyer ranges from $5,000 to $22,000, depending on the bank. So again, you're starting to see how each bank runs the programs a little differently. Next slide, please. Again, we have an example here for the AHP Set-Aside program, and this is the Native American Homeownership Initiative, which is a Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines program. It provides down payment and closing cost assistance to income-eligible Native American, Native Alaskan, or Native Hawaiian households. And households can access up to $15,000 through FHLBank Des Moines member institutions. So this is a good example of what I was talking about in terms of the naming. Now, the other federal home loan banks will have programs with different names, but keep in mind that these programs are eligible for Native American communities across the United States. So it might not be named a Native American homeownership program, but Native American households are definitely eligible. Next slide, please. So now I'll turn it back to Annie to continue with our community lending programs.
Thank you, Tom. In addition to the regulatory grant programs Tom just went over, the Federal Home Loan Banks also offer community lending programs. Through the Community Investment Program, or CIP, and the Community Investment Cash Advance Program, or CICA, the Federal Home Loan Banks provide discounted loans, which we call advances, to members financing housing or economic development. These below market rate loans incentivize community development lending for our members. Additionally, our members have used these loans to fund owner-occupied and rental housing, to construct roads, bridges, and other critical infrastructure, and to provide small business loans. Next slide, please. At this point, we're going to move on to voluntary programs. As I mentioned in the first portion of my presentation, several of the Federal Home Loan Banks operate voluntary programs. These programs are different from our regulatory programs because they are not statutorily mandated, and they're designed to address the unique affordable housing and economic development needs in each district. As such, the program offerings differ by Federal Home Loan Bank. Over the next few slides, I'm going to highlight some of our voluntary program offerings. Please keep in mind that what I'm presenting is not exhaustive. Please check out the resource list on the CVAT platform for a full list of all of the programs the Federal Home Loan Banks offer. And as a reminder, it's important to work with your particular FHLBank and its member institutions to access these programs. Next slide, please. This slide highlights 3 Federal Home Loan Bank voluntary programs. The first is Chicago's Diverse Developer Initiative, which was newly launched this year. This program provides grant funds to support internships, fellowships, training, and mission-driven investments for diverse developers of affordable housing in Illinois and Wisconsin. This program was developed through many conversations with our advisory council and board of directors around what we were seeing in our communities and what was needed. The second example is the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis's Elevate Small Business, which provides grant funding for small businesses in Indiana and Michigan. Last but not least is FHLBank San Francisco's Access to Housing and Economic Assistance for Development, or AHEAD for short, which provides grant funding for economic development initiatives in California, Arizona, and Nevada. I intentionally selected these 3 examples of voluntary programs because they illustrate the wide variety of needs being addressed. For the next 2 slides, I'm going to share a couple of success stories, similar to how Tom did for the Affordable Housing Program. And I'm highlighting here how Native American organizations have accessed voluntary program funding to make a difference in their communities. Next slide, please. So in the previous slide, I mentioned the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis Elevate Small Business Grant Program, and that is the first success story that I want to share. The small business beneficiary is called Back Road Organic Supply, and they specialize in organic garden supplies. This business is owned by the Keweenaw Bay tribal members in Michigan. They applied for grant funding in partnership with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis member and a CDFI member, Lake Superior Community Development Corporation. Back Road Organic Supply used the $25,000 of grant funds to install a new greenhouse. The picture of the greenhouse is shown on the screen. And this facilitated them to change their operations from a part of the year to year round, enabling them to meet the demand for healthy food in their community. Next slide, please. The second success story features the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco's AHEAD grant program. The White Mountain Apache Housing Authority was awarded grant funds through two Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco members, SunWest Bank and Mojave State Bank. They were awarded these grant funds to create a public transportation system around the reservation. The Housing Authority was able to purchase a commercial bus and establish bus stops strategically placed, allowing families reliable access to neighborhood institutions, including a community center, schools, and a healthcare clinic. These two examples illustrate how the Federal Home Loan Banks use voluntary programs to support community development initiatives beyond our traditional focus of housing development and down payment assistance. Now, once again, I'm going to hand it back to Tom to cover CDFI membership and wrap up the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Annie. And just want to say we're still trying to get out to that project in Arizona with the White Mountain Apache tribe. We just haven't been able to due to COVID. So hope to get out there later this year and check out the bus system. So as Annie mentioned, I'm going to cover a bit on CDFI membership, which I think is important to most of you. The main benefits of being an FHLBank member as a CDFI includes access to reliable liquidity, which includes the advances that Annie mentioned, and access to the grant programs that we covered in terms of affordable housing and other community lending programs. The FHL banks are building our portfolio of CDFI members at this point, and so it's something that we want to strongly encourage. Next slide, please. Here are some overall regulatory requirements for CDFI membership. Like our grant programs, each bank approaches membership a bit differently. So again, please reach out to the bank in your district if you are interested in membership. Again, we'll provide that resource list later on for you to have that contact info. Next slide, please. So here are the key takeaways. To recap, FHL banks offer financing for tribes to build affordable housing and support economic development. So we urge you to contact your local FHL bank to access this financing, and we look forward to partnering with you. Before we get into our questions, I just want to say a couple of things. Again, thank you for attending this presentation. Also, I want to note that we're going to try to get to as many key questions as possible, but again, reach out to your local Federal Home Loan banks if you didn't get your question answered. Also want to note that Annie and I represent just 2 of the 11 Federal Home Loan banks. So something we might say generally for the system might have some nuances for your local bank. So definitely contact that bank to confirm. And now I will turn it over to Fern to start with the questions.
Thank you, Tom and Annie. That was a fantastic presentation. I wanted to see if there was any questions in the chat, or if anybody wanted to add questions in the chat for our panelists. I'm not sure that we see any questions in the chat yet. I would just like myself to know a little bit more about membership for CDFIs. I know you touched on that. I don't know if you can pull up the screen that relates to that. And I know you said it's different in each state depending on those relationships with the member FHLB banks, but I know that that's probably one of the main interests of some of our participants.
Yeah, so I think, and Annie, chime in if I'm missing something. So again, I'm just going to touch on it broadly because these are very detailed requirements, and we're both in our community investment department, so this isn't really our area. But some of the considerations that will come up for a CDFI, just like any member, would be what collateral that you can pledge in terms of the mortgages or loans that you're lending to your communities. So whether that's eligible collateral, a lot of it's based on our regulation under the Federal Housing Finance Agency. A lot of it's based on the assets and credit ratings of the CDFIs and that type of thing. So just that's kind of a really high level idea of some of the considerations as a CDFI. Each of our federal home loan banks have a member services department. It might be called something else in different banks, but if you contact us with that resource list that we provided, we'll put you in touch with our team members, and they can go through the nitty-gritty and all the details of that in terms of applying for bank membership.
That's fantastic. And I know that each FHLB bank has different programs. As you mentioned, I know in Wisconsin here, we're familiar with some of those resources and have actually been able to partner with the FHLB of Chicago and receiving a capacity building grant, which to me was wonderful for our CDFI to have access to partnering with an organization like yourself, along with having some funds available for building our coffers internally. Also, I know Wisconsin and Illinois, there's the disaster relief program, which helps with disasters. I know we've had some big flooding in the North Woods of Wisconsin that the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago assisted with those small grants for families that needed assistance. So there's really a gamut of things that the Federal Home Loan Bank system offers throughout the country. And we just love that we underscored a lot of the projects that have done work in Native communities. We do have one question that has come through so far. Do any of the Federal Home Loan Banks purchase asset-backed securities?
So again, Annie, chime in. I can say I know at least one of the banks, and I think several of the banks purchase mortgage-backed securities. And that's an important revenue stream that feeds into our affordable housing program and other grant programs as well. I don't know, Annie, if you wanted to say anything else on that or the mortgage purchase.
Yeah, the Federal Home Loan Bank system, some of the banks participate in a secondary mortgage market program called MPF. Not my area, but it is something that collectively we participate in.
And Fern, just going back to the last question that you asked, I also wanted to just make it clear that we definitely do have CDFI members. It's only been around for the last decade or so that we were able to accept CDFI members, but we're definitely doing that. We've got CDFI members that are sponsoring Native American housing projects and other grants, and we're lending to CDFIs as well. So it is a reality.
And I believe that reality is growing too as you expand your programs and guidelines. I know that some of the programs we definitely tie up with a member bank to apply for certain initiatives, just like some of the projects you mentioned. I was tickled to see the Sakagan project. I've actually been there and Bay Bank, which is owned by my tribe, and working with them as a member of FHLB to get that done. There was a comment in the chat. It says, "Thank you for the great info. We at the Wisconsin Native Loan Fund have a loan with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago." And they will be circling back with Annie regarding that. And yes, Wisconsin Native Loan Fund was able to access your capacity building grant, which to me, it's very unique to see that access for Native CDFIs. So I really applaud the FHLB of Chicago for offering that, and hopefully the other FHLB banks across the country have similar initiatives.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that, Fern. First of all, thank you to whoever wrote that comment in. I am happy to say that with our capacity building grant program, we have been able to award grants to all of the Native CDFIs in Wisconsin. Again, the system is such that we have districts, so we specifically focus on Illinois and Wisconsin. And then also to add to your comment, Fern, all of us that work at the Federal Home Loan Bank and the different banks do talk to each other. This presentation is a great example of that. We had a working group to prepare the content and the resource list. And so we're sharing this information with each other. And when one of us has a good idea that's really successful, we do share it with one another. So you could, some of our voluntary programs are similar and some of them differ. So just keep that in mind. If there's not the specific voluntary program in your district, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be down the road, or that you can't find one that could still benefit the individuals that you serve.
It's an awesome point. And even communicating with those local FHLB system banks to see what programs are out there and ways that you can connect and partner. It's good to know that there's access there, and we appreciate all of your Federal Home Loan Banks participating, that you do communicate. There's another question that came through the chat. It says, since it can be a high hurdle for a CDFI to become a member, how does a Native CDFI partner with a member bank?
Yeah, I think that's, the best example of partnership there is if you take the affordable housing program. The CDFI, even if it's not a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank, could be the project sponsor. So we've seen that at times. Sometimes CDFIs are doing some type of development or have a partnership with a development, like a joint venture, to build affordable housing. So they could sponsor an application, and they could partner with a non-CDFI member, such as a bank or a credit union or an insurance company, to get that grant award. So that's the main way. And just one thing related to that too, if you do become a Federal Home Loan Bank member, sometimes a member, say a bank, they can only do, there's caps per member. So sometimes a member bank might say, oh, I can only sponsor 10 applications. I have these extra ones. So it's always good to have a relationship with your local banks as well, because they might say, oh, CDFI, can you sponsor this grant application or something like that? And then I think there was another question there. Is that correct, Fern?
Yes. It says, it's so incredible to see the projects that you have helped tribes create. If a tribal member wanted to get started with, say, the greenhouse project, where would they start?
Annie, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first place to start is to connect with your local Federal Home Loan Bank that represents your state, visit their website, look at their list of members, and see if there's any that you already have relationships with. In my experience at the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, oftentimes I have, whether it's a CDFI or another community organization, reach out to me, but they don't have any of these relationships. And sometimes we're able to help do some little bit of matchmaking, or these relationships do exist. Maybe you just don't know about them. So sometimes financial institutions are represented on your boards or another advisory council. So that's where I'd start, is figuring out which Federal Home Loan Bank serves your district, and check out the members of that Federal Home Loan Bank. I'll really quickly address, I saw another question come in. Can a credit union be a member? And yes, that's commercial banks, credit unions, insurance companies, CDFIs, and I feel like I'm forgetting one, but those are our main categories.
There's older category of savings and thrifts, if anybody remembers the old savings and loan days.
Are there any other questions people may have? If so, throw them up in the chat, please. How can members and Federal Home Loan Banks do more effective outreach to tribal communities? I love that question.
A great question. I'll take a start at it, and I'd love to hear, Tom and Fern, what you think. This is something that I can speak for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago that we're thinking about a lot. We have through the years made connections with more entities than we have in the past, and I think the relationships are growing. And we're being much more mindful of our outreach in general and including tribal communities in that outreach. And that is one of the reasons that we're very honored to be here today to start that, to deepen those relationships.
Yeah, I think this session is a testament to that for sure. And we really look forward to future sessions and panels. And I think even just the work that your bank in Chicago has done in Wisconsin also shows those connections. But across the country, really being able to highlight those projects in Indian country that the Federal Home Loan Bank system has sponsored and funded, and just really being at the table, literally, when need be, throughout tribal communities. But I think it's a wonderful start, the things that have been going on here in the Midwest, and maybe having opportunities to showcase those projects in those other areas, and also being present at some of these other functions that really connect you to Indian country as a Federal Home Loan Bank system. I think that's going to be a huge pivot to creating those relationships as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, that we have some ideas, as Annie mentioned just now, but we're definitely here to solicit feedback. So, contact us, reach out. And if you have ideas, oh, the Federal Home Loan Bank should be going to this conference or be at this event, definitely let us know. We're aware of, and the FHLBank system has sponsored, for example, the the National American Indian Housing Council conferences over the years. We've all been set back by COVID, and also in terms of affordable housing development. But this is a year where we're really trying to get back into that outreach.
I love the questions, so keep them coming if people have other questions. We just did share some resources in the main chat, some links there for everybody. And of course, it's also on the convening website under resources as well. I'm not sure if there's any other questions coming through. Fine. We'll just give it another minute or so.
In the meantime, I'll just add that this is not your only opportunity. As we both Tom and I have said throughout the presentation, we really welcome your feedback, your questions. Please reach out to us, reach out to your Federal Home Loan Bank locally, and we're looking forward to forming and strengthening these relationships.
Yeah, definitely. We're at a moment. I just want to say also that our regulator, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, is really supporting Native American community development. We all do annual community lending plans, and they're encouraging us to identify tribes in our district and address housing and economic development needs in our district for Native American communities. So now is definitely the time for input and to get your grant applications.
Your inbox is blowing up as we speak, I'm sure. Yeah, it is definitely the time, because I've been on some of those calls where they're really showcasing their initiatives in Indian country. So very excited on that note. Another question, it says, I know it varies by federal home loan banks, but what is the best way to leverage FHLB resources to support native homeownership beyond down payment assistance?
Sure. So one thought there is there are the two affordable housing programs I mentioned, and one is this homeownership down payment assistance, and it pays for some other related closing costs. And then there's the Affordable Housing Program General Fund, which is for both rental and homeownership. Our bank, for example, and other banks, I'm sure, have given grants out for the construction of housing as well, because we know also you can't purchase a home if you haven't built the home. And we're also looking, now this is something that's going to vary from bank to bank, but we're looking more into how to set up the grant documents to avoid some of the bureaucracy like the BIA recording and things like that. Having scoring categories to support Native American homeownership. So those are some other examples. I don't know, Annie, if there might be some other programs.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts came to mind. One, and again, I'll speak for Chicago, but we see a lot of applications for homeownership rehab as well. So not just down payment assistance. As I mentioned, we work with our advisory council and our board committees on there's certain parts of our programs that are flexible and certain parts that are regulatory. So over the years for the general fund, depending on how we write our implementation plan and make changes year to year, it can incentivize rehab perhaps more than new construction or owner occupied versus rental. So we're always balancing based on what we're seeing in the district. One other thing I'll add is that in Chicago, and I know a few other banks are doing this as well, is we're looking at how we can support homeownership through our voluntary funds. And one thing that Chicago has done this year is we have a home ownership counseling resource program. So what we did is we funded both of our state HFAs, and those HFAs in turn are providing home ownership counseling grants to HUD approved counseling agencies throughout Illinois and Wisconsin. And through that outreach, we have had conversations about if and how tribal communities would be included and or left out inadvertently. So that's something that we're thinking really closely about with program design. So I think, both of our regulatory programs and voluntary programs, we're looking at ways to kind of deepen our impact in this area.
That reminds me, Annie, often, when you start with that first phone call or meeting with your local bank member, oftentimes the member will find, try to see what are you interested in whether it's home ownership or rental, and you can see, what's the member's business. Do they do multifamily loans? Do they do housing loans? And then you can come, the member can come to the Federal Home Loan Bank and find out, okay, what do you have for that? So it's very much a two-way street. You find out what are the needs and then what programs can be used to address those needs.
Another question came through. How can Native practitioners explore some of these ideas? Can they get engaged with federal home loan banks through advisory councils, etc.? Wonderful question.
Annie, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start, and then Tom, add anything that I miss. I think, the answer is yes. Every year, depending on vacancies, we have open nominations for our advisory councils, and all of the federal home loan banks are becoming more and more mindful of representation on our advisory councils. So I encourage you to, I'm not sure what state you're in, but connect with the Federal Home Loan Bank in your district, see who's on the advisory council there. Most of us have mailing lists where we're providing updates on our programs and new initiatives. So that's where I'd suggest to start.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're getting more applications from Native American candidates for our affordable housing advisory councils. And it's going to range from bank to bank, but I know at least, like, for example, with a couple of banks, you can nominate yourself. So why not? So if you have a substantial affordable housing or economic development experience, go for it. And that can go, the banks basically post that on their website once a year or so. So that one, you don't have to go through a member. You just go look at the website and apply.
One thing that Tom's comment made me think about is a lot of the federal home loan banks, Chicago included, are being very mindful of educational opportunities and taking advantage of opportunities to educate our board, our staff on these issues. So I'll give a huge shout out to Fern, who actually came to one of our board meetings to talk about issues affecting Native American communities. And that has spurred a lot of dialogue. And I can tell you, within the 5 years I've been at the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, these issues and the support for this type of community development is such an important conversation in all of our program decisions. So I cannot emphasize enough that type of opportunity as well.
That's what I was so excited about, knowing that naming business about really doing investments and partnerships in Indian country, because they're inviting us to the table. I did want to also mention, I'm excited to hear about your HUD housing counseling opportunities, because OWISTA is the umbrella of 12 certified HUD housing counseling agencies. They're all native CDFIs across the country. So I'll make sure to share that with them as well,
Yes,
if they're not on the call. Do. But really glad to see that there's movement there too on such an important initiative around education.
With the housing counseling, often the housing counseling agencies qualify the low-income buyers for our down payment assistance program. So we're partnering one way or another. Yeah.
And we have a lot in Chicago. We have a lot of HUD counseling agencies that are sponsors for the Affordable Housing Program General Fund. So they actually apply with a member for subsidy to provide down payment assistance or homeownership rehab for their clients.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
We've seen some of the Native American Pathways homeownership training in some of the grants that we've given out as well.
Yeah, that's the NAIHC curriculum, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Let's see. It says, I work for a credit union who is a member, but I am ignorant as to how our credit union members can access things like the Native American Homeownership Initiative. Do you have training opportunities about different programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would recommend visiting the Federal Home Loan Bank website that you are a member of, and all of us have events monthly. Most of us have either a membership or a sales function that acts as a relationship manager, and they can really provide a lot of one-on-one guidance on how to best leverage our programs for your institution.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have basically everything's virtual opportunity for San Francisco Bank, and again, it's going to range, on the timing of each Federal Home Loan Bank. But yeah, go to our websites and look up the different webinars and other events that are available.
I'm looking to see if any other questions have come through. Someone says I have 10 more Federal Home Loan Banks to visit. That's an awesome comment.
It was the talk of our bank for weeks after Fern visited.
Oh my gosh. And I thought I overspoke and probably pushed the envelope a bit, but
we love that.
Fern, we have our emails now, so let's come over to California anytime.
All right. I'll make sure it's winter when I come visit you.
Great idea. Great idea.
Well, I'm not sure if we have any other questions come through, but again, actually, do you want to share your, I think that your emails are in the presentation or in the chat somewhere.
The resource list, I think we've got.
And the
it.
resource list,
Yeah.
which is on the event website and in the chat. Oh, thank you, Stephanie, for posting resource lists again. But we really want to thank you, Annie and Tom, for this wonderful presentation and really bringing a plethora of resources to Indian country that CDFIs can connect with and connect our communities with across Indian country. And we really look forward to more conversations and more opportunities to dialogue and connect communities with the Federal Home Loan Bank system. I did want to thank you both again for an excellent session. And I just wanted to thank everybody for attending and participating in our plenary. The closing one today, along with yesterday, all day and today. And really wanted to just tee it up for tomorrow and hope that everybody joins our last day of our OWISTA Capital Access convening. And have a wonderful evening, and we will see you all tomorrow.